explore whether so-called presence could be a pitfall to meditation. This morning's lesson is drawn from a good-hearted question found on Reddit, where the individual wrote, "Trouble feeling present in the moment." They continued, "Beginner here. I've been meditating daily for 10 days so far. I think I've got the basics. Focusing on the breath and coming back to it if I get distracted by thoughts. We'll stick a pin in this, come back to it later. One thing I've read is that you were supposed to feel present in the moment while meditating. I think I get the concept / feeling. I can feel very present in the moment during the day if I decide to do so. Though for some reason, that's not really the case while meditating. For lack of a better term, it's more like my mind is switching into an energy saving mode. By the way, I applaud this individual's use of simile. I'm not tired though. My focus is still on the breath. But the focus gets really weak. It's more of a numb feeling instead of feeling fully present. And I don't really feel like I'm reaching a deep state of meditation. Is this normal? Should I put more effort into maintaining a higher focus on the breath the entire time? I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do. And so I applaud this individual for their enthusiasm, their intelligence, their command of logic, their command of English. You'd be surprised. A lot of people have been cheated out of an important primary education. So, bravo. It would seem very much that the person who wrote this series of questions, these compound questions, is very intelligent and very enthusiastic, and they've done their due diligence. But there's confusion, and the confusion's not the fault of the enthusiast. The confusion is the fault of the authors and the teachers they have relied upon. And so I would like to dispel myths, not for the sake of being smarmy and not to be a troll, because I'm just going to give this individual the benefit of the doubt and assume that they're just as enthusiastic as they seem and they want great results, and I want to set this person up for success. So we're going to begin with some broad brush strokes. So I've highlighted the word focus, numb, and deep. So hopefully I will remember to come back to this. Now, approximately 100 years before the advent of the Buddha, it is said that Lao Tzu composed the 81 poems of the Tao Te Ching. If you have yet to read it, I recommend Dr. Rosemary Anderson's translation. She's fabulous. It's a short book. You can blast through it in a week. You can read it 52 times a year. If you do, you will notice patterns. You will notice that the author of the book felt it important to contrast yang with yin. And you'll also notice that this is not a unique belief system to Taoism. This is consistently observable phenomena in all cultures. In fact, the yang characteristics describe the characteristics in Buddhism of the Buddha's wicked cousin Devadatta. And those characteristics are to be rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel. Let's pay careful attention to being rigid. Oopsie, wrong button. Sorry, guys. Rigid, fearful, and controlling. It is said that the yin's characteristics and also the Buddha's characteristics, also known as Gautama, was that he was flexible, loving, rational, laid-back, egalitarian, lucid, cooperative, and kind, especially flexible, loving, and laid-back. So Sturgeon's Law reminds us that 90% of everything sucks, but not in the fun, tingly way. And that would include meditation instruction. Those who have fallen into the worldview that thinks being rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel is a good thing. These are the people who have a craving for positions of prestige and power and authority. And towards these goals, they bite and claw and scratch and compete. And in the early histories of Buddhism, the Buddha's cousin was very much like this. And so he succeeded in dividing the body of the Buddha's students and dividing up the Buddha's patrons until he had for himself a collection of followers and a collection of patrons, and he had his own community, which crashed because he put all his work into accumulating power and authority, and no work into actually mastering the Buddha's teachings, mastering the path of wisdom, and actually being able to benefit people with the power he craved once he received it. And so he quickly lost all his power and all his followers, and he came to a very unpleasant end. And so we look around us, and we see that the people defined by being rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel, have seized the levers of power in every setting. Spiritually, secularly, vocationally, recreationally. In every facet of human society, we can see people like this in control, writing books, leading so-called spiritual organizations. There's no plot. It's just a unfortunate characteristic of evolution. Our genes care not about our happiness. They care that we live long enough to pass on our traits, and that's it. And so, because of the way that natural selection works, this is a side effect. It is our Achilles heel as a Terran species. This would explain why there's so much confusion about meditation and mindfulness and presence and state management. Now we know that while there is confusion, I would like very much to dispel the confusion. Now there was 3 words I wanted to keep in mind. One was focus, one was deep, and the other one was what? Let's see. Focus, numb, and deep. Okay. So, the Buddha taught there were 7 enlightenment factors. The first enlightenment factor is mindfulness. When we undermine, so mindfulness is like trying to put on a fitted sheet on your bed, but that's a size too small. If it doesn't, if one corner doesn't fit, it doesn't work right. And so when we start picking and choosing what to notice, we undermine our mindfulness and experience numbness here and there. Allow me to elaborate. This is an artist's presentation of a side view, a cross section of a human brain. This is the forehead, this is the back of the head, this is the neck, blah, blah, blah. So when we access our medial prefrontal cortex to actively concentrate, and when we access our dorsolateral prefrontal cortex to actively contemplate, a very strange thing happens. Our blood collects, our fluid collects at our amygdala. Amygdala, this is a squishy looking thing, this round-ish sort of a thing. It functions as the seat of aggression and anxiety, sitting at the bottom of our limbic system in the veritable dungeon, if you will. And like a beast chained to a wall under a castle, it is not a happy camper. But something's really weird. When we cease to rely upon the medial prefrontal cortex in our efforts to actively concentrate, instead choose to passively practice mindfulness in harmony with a different part of our brain, with a region of our autonomic nervous system known as the sympathetic nervous system. When we do this, when we rely upon the sympathetic nervous system, which is ensconced within the thoracic or ribcage region of our spinal cord, when we rely upon our sympathetic nervous system, something strange happens. You see, this sympathetic nervous system has not evolved to actively concentrate, nor has it evolved to mind blank. What has it evolved to do? It has evolved to notice, but in a special way. It has evolved to notice spontaneously. I got the wrong phrase. It has evolved to notice vulnerably, passively, viscerally, and randomly. And as you can imagine, that is the opposite of active concentration. This evolved as a survival mechanism. Consider, if you will, the idea of two of our ancestors climbing out of the jungle canopy and venturing into the savannah. One is completely enthralled by the sight of a beautiful ladybug crawling up a plant as it passes through a beam of light. It's just beautiful and enthralling. And the first individual just focuses single-pointedly on the splendor of a ladybug. And really, who can blame him? Now consider his friend. His friend is a twitchy son of a bitch. And he is all over the place. He is noticing everything. And consequently, he's able to hear the footfall of an approaching predator and run the hell away. Only one of those two lived long enough to pass on their genetic material. We are the descendants of people who found that the sympathetic nervous system's approach to perception could keep it alive. In the world we live in, the number of predators trying to eat us, the number of literal predators trying to end us is remarkably reduced. And so we've developed the habit of living according to our medial prefrontal cortex. And we wonder why it makes us so unhappy. Now, the cool thing about the sympathetic nervous system is that it has evolved to notice all manner of things. It's evolved to perceive sights, sounds, sensations, flavors, scents, and the like. It has evolved to perceive emotions, intentions, thoughts, memories, and imaginings. It has evolved to perceive both the external and the internal, the physical and the mental, the pleasurable and the painful, the interesting and the boring, the glorious and the grotesque. Now you might ask yourself, how do we keep from getting overwhelmed? What do we do with all this stuff that we notice? That's an excellent question. Fortunately, the sympathetic nervous system isn't the only component of our autonomic nervous system. Its sibling component is the parasympathetic nervous system. It is ensconced within both the lower lumbar region of our spinal cord as well as the tippy top of the cervical region that some would describe as our brainstem. And this bad boy has evolved to support both physical relaxation as well as mental release. And this is how it all comes together. Every time we inhale, whether we know it or not, we're wired to automatically perceive. And every time we exhale, whether we know it or not, we're already wired to release. So all mindfulness and meditation are doing is cooperating with the factory-installed wiring that is already present. Now, let's pretend you were going to make a pie. You might first go shopping for apples. You might go shopping for all the ingredients. You might come home. You might wash the apples. You might start assembling the crust and making the dough. And then you might start, you'll do different steps in a different sequence. You don't do them all at the same time. That's not how you make a pie. Similarly, there are times when we go through life where it's perfectly appropriate to concentrate on a task. There's other times when it's perfectly appropriate to flow with our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. During mindfulness and meditation, we flow. And in fact, our brain can be like a good-natured, very intelligent idiot, kind of like Urkel. Urkel means well, but he often gets underfoot. And a solution is to give our Urkel a task. And so when we ask our brain to silently and mentally recite the demonstrative pronoun this during our inhalation, and when we ask our brain to silently and mentally recite the one-syllable verb ease during our exhalation, our brain stops living in opposition to our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. Instead, it cooperates with them. So this is an ideal scenario. Sadly, it's rarely taught. And instead, people say, hey, instead of noticing your physical state or your mental state, select a state. Select a physical experience, select a mental experience. And if you don't experience that, then you're failing at meditation. This rips us out of mindfulness that notices vulnerably, passively, viscerally, and randomly, and thrusts us back into the active concentration of our medial prefrontal cortex. So it says to our body, stop relying on your the mechanisms of your spinal cord and start relying on your prefrontal cortex. Prefrontal cortex is splendid. It's one of many, many useful tools. But ask a carpenter, if you only rely on one tool for every job, it's not going to work well. A hammer is great for pounding nails, but you don't want to use it to sand. You don't want to use it to clean a window. A hammer is a specific tool for a specific job. When we over-rely on our prefrontal cortex, we run the risk of exhausting it, which can often create symptoms that look and feel like depression, which I really would not recommend. Additionally, when we over-rely on our prefrontal cortex, when we rely on active concentration and active contemplation, our blood mass collects at our cranky and anxious amygdala. But something wild happens when we shift gears from our prefrontal cortex to our autonomic nervous system. Our blood mass shifts from the amygdala to our anterior cingulate gyrus. This catcher's mitt-looking thing functions as the hub of our mirror neurons, the seat of empathy and compassion and love. Love is a litmus test of the quality of our meditation. The more crankiness we are experiencing, the more that infers to us we're not really practicing mindfulness and meditation, we're practicing concentration. And let's face it, when we choose to focus on one thing, such as our breath, and when we notice that our mind has wandered and we pull it back, that is indulging our controlling tendencies. That is indulging our yang characteristics. That is relying upon this region of our prefrontal cortex. And that is going to make us cranky bastards. However, when we sit back and let our mind notice whatever it wants, whether that, and when we let our mind perceive, emote, intend, reason, recall, and imagine, when we let it run hither and yon, that's mindfulness. When we relax in harmony with our exhalation, or I should say when we let our body relax during our exhalation, the way it already has evolved to do, that's meditation. That frees us from the crankiness. That helps us to experience the loving kindness, which really comprises 50% of the Buddha's Eightfold Path, which is wild. The goal of meditation is not to see how deep you can go. That is an artifact of those upon the path of yang, those who are being very, very controlling. We automatically go deep. Every time we fall asleep, we're going deep. Every time we wake up, we're crawling out of that depth. So going deep is not something magical. It's common. It happens every day, several times a day. When we indulge our controlling tendencies and choose what to focus on, our mind's capacity to notice its perceptions, emotions, intentions, thoughts, memories, and imaginings dulls. Like any computer, our brain only has so much bandwidth. When we pour our energy into concentration, we don't have enough energy for perception. That is why when we are concentrating on experiencing a specific state, or concentrating on just noticing our breath, our other perceptions dull. But there's good news. In the second to final passage of the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha explained that this path was so joyful, so pleasurable, and so easy that it could be mastered in a week. Now, for those of us who haven't conditioned our bodies to sustainably sit for 75 minutes a pop, might I recommend a gentle approach? On your first week of training, begin by training for 5 minutes every 12 hours. Sitting comfortably and sustainably, practicing the this and ease of mindfulness and meditation in harmony with our breathing. By the second week, you may wish to bump it up to 10 minutes. By the third week, you might wish to bump it up to 15 minutes. Increasing incrementally and gently. By the conclusion of the 15th week, you could have become, which is less than 4 months, less than a third of a year, you could become so comfortable sitting this way that you can sit for a 15-minute lesson and 60-minute session once every 12 hours. Because you have progressed incrementally and gently, it has reduced the stress to your own body, your own emotions, and as well as the emotions of your pets, your children, your partner, your employer. Because you're progressing gently, it creates great sustainability. I do look forward to exploring the finer details of practice with you after approximately 30 seconds of housekeeping. This is Lama Jigme Gyatso of the Buddha Joy Meditation School. For more than 30 years, I spent about 8 hours a day, almost every day, studying, practicing, mastering, and reverse engineering the teachings and techniques of each sect of Buddhism so that you would not have to. Welcome, my friends, to Meditate Like a Jedi, which is made possible due to the generosity of viewers just like you. Return now to this morning's practice text labeled or titled Love and Letting Go. Let us begin by, as a preparatory practice, by bringing the 4 bases of mindfulness, bringing our experience of the circumstantial, the physical, the interpersonal, and the mental into the path of loving kindness. Please chant with me. Since we are not alone in our mental frustrations, we could also long that others' mental needs also be met. During our inhalation, we could silently and mentally recite wise. During our exhalation, we could silently and mentally recite all. No, it's not our job to actively visualize or emote or believe. We're just playing with words, silently and mentally and passively. And it's kind of like intentionally, it's like we've invited someone over for lunch and we're ladling lentils into their bowl. We're ladling, so we're just wishing that all minds everywhere be wise. I don't think it's a far stretch of the imagination to look at the news and say, I think everyone could do with a bit more wisdom. So I'd like to practice this with you for approximately 4 rounds, assuming that a round is simply one inhalation followed by an exhalation. And I found it easier to count rounds using the Bengali crease counting method. I like to advance the tip of my left thumb during the inhalation, moving it to keeping track of these next 4 rounds by placing it upon the first set of creases on its left little finger, and then the second set, and then the third set, and then the tip. So please practice along with me as silently and mentally we recite wise, all. Please chant with me. Since we are not alone in our interpersonal frustrations, we could also long that others' interpersonal needs also be met. I think it's deliciously ironic that our desire to get our needs met can fuel the fire of our empathy and love and compassion. Let's continue, this time counting upon the creases and then tip of our left ring finger. Since we are not alone in our physical frustrations, we could also long that others' physical needs also be met. Let us continue counting on our left middle finger. So these exercises would fit under the heading of right aspiration, which is the second fold of the Buddha's Eightfold Path. Since we are not alone in our circumstantial frustrations, we could also long that other circumstantial needs also be met. Good morning and welcome to today's meditation live stream. The moment you have a specific question about Buddhist chanting, Buddhist meditation, Buddhist philosophy, or their application, please type your question in great detail in the chat window. During our inhalation, we can silently and mentally recite Boon. During our exhalation, we can silently and mentally recite All. And we're just gently, we're just playing with words and with the intention of guiding our intention along the pathway of love, wishing that all beings experience fortunate circumstances. Let's count on our left index finger. Advancing our thumb during the inhalation. Although it could be quite lovely if we were Gandalf the Grey and could work magic, most of us are not. And so what we're really doing is exercising the neural pathways responsible for love. We're now going to turn our attention to our second of two preliminary practices. It's kind of like a runner limbering up for a sprint. So now we're going to bring the four bases of mindfulness, the circumstantial, the physical, the interpersonal, and the mental, into the path of impermanence. Please chant with me. Observing the coming and going of circumstantial phenomena, help us to see that ever-changing one and all, there is nothing permanent to grasp. So what are some examples of this? Over the span of human history, we see the coming and going of genocide and peace, exploitation and justice, hate and love, plenty and scarcity. During our inhalation, we silently and mentally recite the noun lots. We're using lots as a one-syllable synonym for circumstance. During our exhalation, we're using the verb melt as a metaphor of change, a metaphor of impermanence. This is nothing crazy. We see change all the time. No one makes it to adulthood without observing that with the coming and the going of the seasons, we see the impermanence of a year. With the waxing and the waning of the moon, we see the impermanence of a month. With the rising and the setting of the sun, we see the impermanence of a day. With the swelling and the sinking of our chest, we feel the impermanence of a breath. Let us count again. Let us count our second set of 16 rounds upon our left hand, beginning again with our little finger. Please chant. Observing the coming and going of physical phenomena, help us to see that ever-changing one and all, there is nothing permanent to grasp. We see physical phenomena changing all the time. Sometimes we feel energetic, sometimes we feel sedate, sometimes we feel industrious, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we feel hot, sometimes we feel cold. You get the idea. We're using forms as a one-syllable synonym for body. Let's count upon our left ring finger. By the way, contemplating impermanence is the second of two preparatory practices, and it is ironically the first fold of the Buddha's Eightfold Path, right view. It is not something we need to rigidly believe in. We already observe it all the time. All we need to do is shed our resistance to it. Please chant with me. Observing the coming and going of interpersonal phenomena, help us to see that ever-changing one and all, there is nothing permanent to grasp. Let us count upon our left middle finger. Fellowship comes and goes. Strife comes and goes. Cooperation comes and goes. Competition comes and goes. Observing the coming and going of mental phenomena, help us to see that ever. Let us. Whoopsie. Wrong button. Let us continue counting upon our left index finger. Having completed our two sets of preliminary practices, we can turn our attention now to the primary practice, where we spontaneously notice Where we bring whatever we spontaneously notice into the path of awareness and letting go, which is also known as mindfulness and meditation, the seventh and eighth folds of the Buddha's Eightfold Path. As we breathe in, as we passively notice our body breathing in, silently and mentally we can recite the demonstrative pronoun this. As we passively notice our body exhaling, we can silently and mentally recite the verb ease. Ooh, look at that. Let's see if I can't fix that real quick. Much better. Okay. Up until this point, we have been counting 16 rounds upon the creases and tips of our left fingers. And that's fine. In addition to that, on our right hand, we can count sets of 16 rounds. Our first set of 16 rounds, our second set of 16 rounds, and so forth. This is not mandatory, but some people find it helpful. Every time we breathe in, whether we know it or not, we are generating impulses to create a vertical traction between our tush and our head. And every time we exhale, we release that. Having climbed to contemplative cruising altitude, together as a team, let us meditate as profoundly as Qui-Gon Jinn on Naboo. Again, let us bring the four bases of mindfulness into the path of loving kindness. Since we are not alone in our mental frustrations, we could also long that others' mental needs also be met. Since we are not alone in our interpersonal frustrations, we could also long that others' interpersonal needs also be met. Since we are not alone in our physical frustrations, we could also long that others' physical needs also be met. Since we are not alone in our circumstantial frustrations, we could also long that other circumstantial needs also be met. Now let us bring the four bases of mindfulness into the path of impermanence. Observing the coming and going of circumstantial phenomena, help us to see that ever-changing one and all there is nothing permanent to grasp. Observing the coming and going of physical phenomena, help us to see that ever-changing one and all there is nothing permanent to grasp. Observing the coming and going of interpersonal phenomena, help us to see that ever-changing one and all there is nothing permanent to grasp. Observing the coming and going of mental phenomena help us to see that ever-changing one on all there is nothing permanent to grasp. Let us seal this morning's practice by percussively chanting loving wishes for universal enlightenment and well-being. May all minds clear yet impermanently as enlightened as a Buddha's mind. May all experiences of the interpersonal resounding yet impermanent be as loving as a Buddha's speech. May all bodies sensual yet impermanent be as beautifully healthy as a real or imagined Deva's form. May all circumstances appearing yet impermanent be as safe and abundant as a real or imagined Devi's land. If you feel that I have earned it, you could give this live stream a thumbs up. You could even help support this channel. In approximately 9 3/4 hours, I would very much like to return to lead today's evening meditation class and group practice. And if you are as geeky as me, may the Force be with you always.